Hello and welcome to Pleasure Morsels. Thanks for being here. I'm so excited to be sitting with Nicola Dawn of Lord Violet Jewelry. So, Lord Violet is a subversive yet femme jewelry line influenced by alternative subculture. Brass is paired with recycled components to create designs that are luxurious yet eco responsible. A consistent theme of black and gold creates a dark, provocative, and edgy collection that pushes boundaries. Created by independent Canadian designer Nicola Dawn out of her studio based in Montreal. Thanks so much for being here, Nicola. So
Thank you for
excited.
having me.
So we're here to talk about the erotic and the pleasureful and the sensual in the creative process. Um, so for you, what parts of the creation process are most connected to erotic expression?
Yeah, so it starts with design for me. So I'm looking at things that I find really beautiful and subversive, and I'm looking for ways to make them into wearable art. So for me, the symbols of erotic often stem from BDSM. Personally, BDSM and fetish subculture. So I like to take those kind of symbols, for example, like the O-ring, which for anyone who's not familiar, the O-ring is traditionally something that's worn by a submissive on usually like a leather collar or collar that might be attached to a leash. And it's interesting because a submissive in the BDSM context is in the position of um, giving up control. But this person at the same time actually has the most power. So I would like to say that I've taken that symbol, the O ring, from the collar, and not only said, okay, let's remember the amount of power that this person actually has in this position, but also trying to subvert it and say that you don't always have to be in that position of submission. I also like to wear it as a symbol of dominance, to be honest. I think it's a very strong symbol. I'm very much aroused by hardware also. So the O-ring is just literally a circle of either brass or silver. And it has this like, there's all different sizes, but it has this beautiful weight to it and this like heaviness. So when it's put on jewelry, it it's very like stunning visually to me because of that weight. And so when someone's wearing it, the wearer can feel their power in that sense. So you can be submissive, you can be dominant, and it's shown by that's it could be even really small O-ring on your neck, but that little symbol that's there that not even everyone knows about too.
That's so lovely because when I see your pieces, it is that the circle and you keep it simple. There might be other kind of adornments and detail, but it's the pureness of the O that is really striking.
Yeah, well, it can be used very simply, right?
Mm.
So, I like to make statement jewelry, but at the same time, if it can be something that has, it catches the eye, it's a little bit different, maybe something that you haven't seen before, and people either, if they don't know, they might be wondering, like, what is that? Or if they know, then they know.
So we have this, the psychological dynamics of power and dominance and submission that comes into relationship often between two or more people. But here you're taking the elements of it and translating it into jewelry. So what what happens when someone puts it on? There's a body there. So how do these human bodies connect to the materials that you're playing with?
Yeah, so something that I find really interesting is that not only the first thing that is possible, which I really love, is that the wearer can put this on in any kind of setting or context. So maybe they just want to go to work and feel like fucking sexy,
Yeah.
and all their coworkers aren't even really gonna know, but the jewelry is subtle enough that they can be there wearing it and still kind of feel like a piece of them is either seen or just is there for themselves and on their body and like a reminder. And the other thing that really comes up for me, again, it goes back to like the design process. When I started designing jewelry, like I was making it for myself as an invisible femme, and
Mm.
looking to really balance my femininity with something a little bit more masculine. So like feeling my masculine side, feeling my erotic side as well. Um, so I wanted to create jewelry that used materials that encompassed all of those aspects. So the masculinity and the eroticism and all pieces of, or all aspects of each piece, I think is so important. So I felt like a lot of jewelry was maybe missing something. Like they would only pay attention to the chain, or maybe it was just a chain or just a
Mhm.
pendant. So I said, how can I really like enjoy every aspect? And that became something where I was like, okay, I'm going to focus on each particular piece. So the chain for me, I looked for like the most interesting chains I could possibly find. And what I started to see was like these very luxurious pieces that I'd never seen before, or even actually was seeing from my inspirations, like in film noir, for example.
Mhm.
The fashion at that time, like 50s, 60s, there was a lot of brass, a lot of vintage jewelry, and the snake chain. And there
Mhm.
is so much beauty in the snake chain. It comes in a lot of different forms, but it has different widths, it has different thicknesses. And as it sounds, like as a snake chain, it just has tiny little pieces that are connected. And it has this movement where it can move basically in all directions. It's like sleek, it's slippery. So not only does it look beautiful, but it feels really good. So I love that when you put on a piece, you get to feel that against your skin, that like softness, that caress. It's sensual in that way as well. So there's the snake chain, and then the other one that's been really important for me is called fishbone chain.
Mm.
And over again, I get this feedback from people, and they just are so fascinated by the way that it drapes, the different weights of it, how it's like heavy. And then I'll have, say, maybe men actually who would like to wear jewelry and feel like a bit more feminine, where they say, okay, I feel seen in this jewelry because it's heavy, it's edgy, I can wear this and feel like both of my masculinity and femininity are balanced in this specific chain. So I love that it can do that.
Oh my god. Ugh, I'm so lucky. Just to be like sitting across from you and hearing you talk and say words like feel and heavy. Yeah, I'm having fun, so thank you. I I'm getting like it's really the weight and tactile. Like I said before, like you use those words of heavy and weight. And there's also, I think you said like slippery or soft, smooth, and that you can already put those into masc and femme categories, that often something that is simple and weighted is considered more masc. And then something that maybe has a sinuousness that moves fluidly is more of a feminine.
Definitely.
And I heard you say the term invisible femme.
hmm
What's that?
So for me, it was something that I discovered kind of early in, or like actually not super early in my sexuality or my journey of sexual kind of orientation and exploration. But um, yeah, for anyone who's not familiar with the term invisible femme, It's a usually a woman who identifies as queer, but because they are very feminine presenting by general like societal standards. So like say for me personally, I love having long hair. I love wearing dresses, skirts. I hate pants. You will probably almost never see me in pants.
Got it.
Um, so things like that. Because they're really not, those feminine aspects are really not associated with traditional kind of queerness.
Mm.
In the past, often lesbians, for example, when we had less vocabulary to describe our sexual orientation, were seen as like the trope was they're butch and they have short hair. And if you want to be seen as a woman who's attracted to women, you had to fit this type, and someone would look at you and maybe not really be able to tell that you were interested in women.
Mhm.
So in that sense, your sexuality was kind of erased, and I felt very much like personally not seen.
Yeah, I hear that, and I relate as well that the symbols of adornment, or they're like, I can't remember, there is a kind of a word like coding, I think might be the word.
Hmm.
It's like, yeah, I think I shaved my hair, I got like an undercut once, and suddenly all these queers were giving me eyes. I'm like, well, first of all, thank you, and also how dare you? Like I was
Okay.
also this queer and hot before, but now I've got this like flashing sign that says like what group I belong to.
Yeah, I actually had the same experience. I shaved my head. I did a Miley Cyrus haircut.
Hmm.
In hope, well, I mean, it wasn't just in hopes of feeling seen and maybe like attracting a partner necessarily, but it was definitely part of the exploration. But I did it and I was like, oh no, this is not what I wanted to do.
It's important to make mistakes.
We have to try,
We have to
definitely.
try. Okay, so this is, for me, this feels like an important question for myself, and for often, I think artists have this feeling of like, especially professional artists who are kind of in the daily grind, anyone who's in any creative field, even adjacent to art making, and also erotically, there's I think a high proportion of folks, whether they're in long-term relationships or not, who feel low desire, who just don't feel connected to source. So this is where my question comes from, is how do you express pleasure and creativity when you're not feeling the flow of inspiration? And does inspiration as a term actually exist?
Yeah. Well, I mean, from a design standpoint, because this is like my career, I do have to find it. It's important to keep things going for myself. So, um, I will often go back to what I know. So that will either involve like going back to the materials that I really love, um, or looking at art that
Mm.
I love and inspires me. So, for example, with the materials in the studio, I'll just sit down. I'll literally, this is like making such a big mess, and that's the greatest part of it.
Mhm.
So, I will sit down, I will get out all of my materials, and I will just start to play without really having the intention of trying to create something very specific. And often I find it just gets the ball rolling, and then it's like a roller coaster that I get totally lost on, and one thing snowballs into another. Um, and then for the latter, in terms of art, there's so many different types of art that I like consuming, but I'm so stimulated visually. So any kind of like erotic art, whether it's going to a museum,
Mm.
looking at an exhibition, going to the library,
Mm.
looking at some books. Um, yeah, and then kind of personally, it's like even if I just want to put on something that feels good, like to get into the mood. So it all comes down to like wearing something that feels sexy, to channel that energy, as well as music, like just really surrounding yourself by that that ambiance that kind of fits whatever vibe you're trying to create. Um, but in terms of is inspiration real, I mean, I do feel like there's these very much these concrete moments that happen for me where I see something. Well, it's funny because I'll see something and maybe I won't really think of too much about it in that moment, but then it's later that it pops into my head and I'm like, oh, like I want to take that and use it for this other thing. So it's um you never know when and where it's going to strike almost. I can have moments of sitting down and being really intentional and trying to find it, but I find that takes a lot of time and there's not always a specific result in that moment, but it's those other times where I've just consumed whatever media, looked at a magazine, and 2 weeks later all of a sudden I'm making jewelry and it's like, oh, I'm thinking of this like visual I have in my head now all of a sudden. So
Mm.
it's hard to really like say it as a concrete thing, you know.
But it seems that you go to the external source. So it's not, you're not forcing it to just spring out of you. You're taking other people's work and other materials. You know, it seems like you're playing with things and putting them into different configurations. And sometimes these things need to incubate. Sometimes,
Yes.
and you know, for relating to like wider creativity and erotic expression, sometimes there is some downtime when actually trusting the process is that as long as you are staying connected to the external world and where you want to get to, I think things are happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I think giving yourself that time is so important too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think there's also that a little bit of fear that I've always had. Like when I see other people's work, I'm just going to end up copying it. But what I find is that even if I get inspiration very like immediately, like I see something and I want to take it right away and make it my own, um, I have this fear. Okay, no, I'm gonna be copying them. This is their work, their art. But I find that it ends up always taking its own life form, like entirely different. So once I started to see that happening, I started to relax a little bit and say, like, that's okay. Like, I can take these ideas, and I'm not scared. I don't find a lot of satisfaction, you know, in creating something that's a likeness of somebody else's. So I just started to trust myself and say, okay, this is my process. Yes, I will engage in other people's work and art, but I know that it'll always end up feeling like mine.
Of course, because no one else has had your life or has your hands. Like, how can it not be something so unique to you? And so this kind of flows into my last question for you, which is, what is your fantasy creation? There's no rules of time, space, resources. What's your dream?
Oh, I mean, this is such a big question,
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh my gosh, so much pressure.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah.
But I would say it's like a little bit small scale, or the things that came to mind. I'm like, well, I'll be honest about this question, you know, and speak about the ideas that I have had in the past that, you know, I would love to realize one day, and kind of was like, I don't know how I'm going to, but um some bigger pieces, like for me, pieces that I work on often are collars, for example. And depending on how they're made, it can take a lot of material. Like so my dream pieces are like giant, like, you know, bottom of the chin
The
down to the
posture
collarbone.
color.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, exactly. um so I have started to kind of try and play and make things like that. Um, it's so a work in progress, but it's a fun experiment. And even the process of, say, molding, because what we do in jewelry is we will make a mold and it will be cast, which means the metal is shot into the mold to create the copy of what we'd like to do. The biggest mold is like 4 inches. Okay, so you can imagine, wanting to make this giant piece, and it has to be made basically from materials from scratch. So, giant torches, giant rods of metal,
Whoa.
bending them on the giant body forms or bust forms. So, yeah.
Beautiful. And I love that a posture collar is restrictive. Like it keeps your neck very, very straight. There's no room for movement. Whereas so many of your pieces now are all about freedom and sensuous movement.
It's true.
Beautiful. Nicola, thank you so much. This has been a delight. I'm feeling inspired. I guess that means inspiration is real.
Oh, I love that for you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your process and yourself in your work.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Are you still there?